You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Tiene min Axel Schwarzenegger.
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
And good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today. Kevin Laramee, joined by Duane Rollins. Duane is a little bit under the weather, so pardon the voice. We both had a little rough weekend with the weather in Canada. Well, that's what happens when you talk about soccer in the winter. But Duane, how was your weekend?
It was okay. About 11 o'clock on Saturday, 11 p.m., I was out with some friends, and all of a sudden I couldn't talk anymore. So I'm here now, though. This is not an accent that I'm trying to put on, but this is what I will sound like today.
High in spirit, low in tone. But Duane, a few news to weekend. We'll talk about today. Leicester. We'll talk about the testimonial in Vancouver for the Canadian women's national team with the retirement of Marie-Ève, Ryan Wilkinson, and Melissa Tancredi. If you want to listen to Melissa Tancredi, by the way, go to Two Upfront Soccer Show on the network, on the Sports Podcasting Network last Friday. You can listen to Melissa talk about her career with Baxter. But Duane, when we're looking at what happened in the weekend, we finally got some resolved in Sacramento. The Republic FC has been sold to SNC Sports and Entertainment Group, the other group that were vying and that did the bid for MLS. And if that bid is accepted, it will be under the Sacramento Republic FC brand.
Yeah, that's a good thing, because I think that branding is important to the fans and just to the unity of the bid, as you said. There are questions about it. What does this mean, this sale? Does that mean that, they're going in with the name, but that's the name, and they're only the Republican name only, right? Like, does Nagy bring in all of his own guys? Does he completely change the culture of the club? That's kind of the worry that's out there now. But in terms of the here and now, I think that it's important. It was important for them to get something done, and they did it fairly quickly as well. Had this dragged out for months or something, then I think that really could have impacted the bid poorly. There is, some movement in Miami apparently today. We're going to wait and see on that. I think a lot of people are hopeful that in Sacramento are hopeful that Miami falls away, because that might be their best way in, because that's a ready-made, ready-to-go kind of launch, right? So there's a possibility that there'll be 5 of these teams get through it if Miami does bail out. Right now, they are currently technically the 24th team to go in if they can get their crap together. But nonetheless, good news in Sacramento, Kevin.
Yep, exactly. And the other news that happened in the weekend, that it's Division 2 as well. The New York Cosmos, after weeks and weeks of speculation of where they will play, they have found a place, and now off with Coney Island, not going to Queens, not going to another boroughs, but they chose to go to Brooklyn, and they are now going to play at MCU Park.
Yeah, that's, I believe, where Lewis wanted them to play. Well, Brooklyn for sure. And that is, of course, the hip area kind of in New York now that a lot of people want to get into, and it has its own distinct sort of culture around it. Do they rebrand the Brooklyn Cosmos, or are they just the Cosmos? I don't know. Maybe they could do something like that. But certainly good news for their fans that they get something that allows them to be a little more accessible. That's, I think, the biggest issue. And, we talked to Liz enough times that was very difficult for them to get out to where they were prior to that at Hofstra last year. So that really affected their attendance. We'll see now that they have no excuse in terms of distance, whether or not they can generate more people. Certainly Brooklyn's got that hipster kind of alternative thinking sort of thing going on. So maybe they can appeal to that and really attract the contrarian soccer fans in New York City. So we'll see. Good luck to them, though.
Yeah, no, exactly. And before we move on to another topic, we wanted to address the situation. Today is a very sad day, yeah, and very sad anniversary in the world of football. It's the airplane tragedy of Manchester United, anniversary of Munich today. So, uh, if you're not aware of the situation, there's always a beautiful film, Munich, that does shed some light on that situation. A lot of books have been written, a lot of documentaries, but this story with the accident of Chapecoense late in 2016, I think this anniversary hits home a little more this year.
Yeah, certainly it's more closer to mind. Obviously, once you hit the big milestones, you tend to, especially they hit the 50th, right? And then that tended to have, it faded away a lot of the sort of attention that came annually after 50. That's sort of normal in these things and not necessarily even unhealthy. But as you say, with the events of last year, the tragic events in Brazil of last year, Colombia, I guess is where the accident happened. But nonetheless, that certainly has brought it more to the forefront. So, that's rivalries go out the window on days like that. So obviously I don't think anyone's hurting anymore about it. It happened so long ago, but certainly it's a day to remember how fragile life can be. So we recognize that.
And in a football soccer world that is planetary, that is global today, with team travels by plane on a daily basis in North America and across the world, with the amount of teams traveling, the amount of teams in the entire world, we're actually lucky that it's something that doesn't happen that often. uh, Airline safety is a high priority, and it is a high success rate as well. Even though we do remember tragedies like the two we just mentioned, it's a daily occurrence now in the world of football because it is the global game, and we do have a lot to say to thanks to the security of airline and airplane in across the world because it is a rare occurrence and it has to stay that way.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at the statistics out there, it's a very safe way to travel, percentage wise. You're more likely to get hit by a bus when you're walking across the street. But nonetheless, the tragedies when they happen are very much front and center, so that causes people to be anxious about it. But as you say, it's a global game in the truest sense. You have people flying all over the world to play other teams, and that's something that makes it unique, and also does mean that just through sheer the lottery, the bad lottery in this case, occasionally these incidents can happen, and we can wish that away. But it was a long time between the last two, so hopefully it'll be at least that long again before it happens again. But unfortunately, the statistics suggest to us that if there's a 1 in a million chance of something happening, well, there's more than a million flights going on, right? So it's probably going to happen eventually again, and that's sad, but we can't
Math.
stop living.
No, exactly. And hashtag math probabilities. And that's literally probabilities happening in real time. All right, let's talk about, Wayne, the game this weekend in Vancouver at BC Place, the testimonial. It was called the Bronze Medal Celebration Tour. But in fact, it's a thank you to the three players that are retiring at the same time as well. Ryan Wilkinson, Melissa Tancredi, and Marie-Ève No, three big part of the last two bronze medals for Canada. That's a big lapse as I just made here. We wish it was gold, but it's bronze. But three big part of the national team that contributed a lot over the last 8 years, Duane, and that are leaving the national team in a better state than it was 8 years ago. What can you tell us off the top of your head about the match? But first of all, about Marie-Ève No, Ryan Wilkinson, and Melissa Tancredi.
Well, three players that were key components to the bronze generation, the back-to-back bronze medals. Look, I'm sure that we have a lot of American listeners and American listeners that may not, they're used to following the U.S. in the Olympics and stuff like that. So a bronze medal celebration may, be funny to them. But this is a much smaller country. And before the women had won the bronze medal in London, they hadn't won a team medal. Canada hadn't won a team medal at the Summer Games since
like 100 years.
Outrageous. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah,
how long ago it was, right?
Like the 1912s or something.
Yeah, it was ridiculous how long it had been. And I believe if you had looked at that medal, if memory serves, I think it was the basketball team or something. There was like basically only two teams in the tournament or some damn thing too.
Yeah,
so
well, basketball was like not even 20 years old at that point.
Yeah, so it was a silly, like it was a big deal to win it here, and the way they won in London, and obviously that U.S. game that they lost, which is ironic that the game that sort of propelled the Canadian women to the forefront of the attention of this country until they are, in my mind, at the very least, the second most popular women's team in Canada right now, behind only the hockey team. And arguably, they might even be more popular. I mean, because they're able to draw 20, 30,000 people wherever they go, and just their numbers through logistics, the women can't do that.
And
nonetheless,
it's not the case
and
with
it's
the
also
women.
not as a competitive an industry, Kevin.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was going to say it's not the case for the Canadian national team of hockey for women. They do not attract 20, 30,000 fans. They do not have the coverage and the footprint on the media market and different markets that the Canadian women's national team has in soccer. And that has to do with the opportunities that are given to soccer players. And there is more, even though it's far and few in between the opportunities for the women in Canada, and hopefully the new teams in the NWSL, and who knows, maybe Vancouver will give more opportunities. But in the world of hockey for women, it's even less. So those things altogether does make Canada women's national team, I think, in Canada, the most popular women team, probably in history of this country as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, it was kind of a coincidence happened when those three women announced the retirement. The CSA put the press release out on that very same day. Hayley Wickenheiser, who undoubtedly was the most famous Canadian female athlete of all time, I think that's probably fair to say, retired on the same day. So it took a bit of the attention away, unfortunately. But, the fact that Wickenheiser is no longer playing means that there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever right now who the most famous Canadian female athlete still playing is. And that, of course, is Christine Sinclair. But in terms of these three women, it was nice to have that day and the ceremony at the end. I made a bit of a pointed comment about how they should really bring Charmine Hooper back into this program and do the same damn thing for her. You can't obviously have her play anymore, but she deserves a presentation. And the way that Hooper was sort of pushed out of that program remains probably its most unfortunate moment. So I will get that out there now that the CSA really should, now that the women have this kind of attention. A pioneer like that deserves to get some kind of acknowledgement and be brought back into the fold in some way. And it's unfortunate that hasn't happened yet.
Well, I understand what you mean, Duane, but if you take the same analogy and you put it in the United States, I haven't heard about Mia Hamm in a whole long time, haven't heard it included in the fold. And I think it's human nature, especially in a sport or in a business or something, when you're the next generation, you want to hype yourself, and not that you forget the past, but you don't necessarily bring it up all too often.
Yeah, well, it's recency bias, but no, in Hooper's case, though, she didn't, like Mia Hamm at least had like her retirement moment, right? And then she got the acknowledgement at the time. Like that didn't happen with Hooper. That's the issue there, that she was just sort of pushed out unceremoniously, even though she played such a significant role. She was pushed out unceremoniously when she still could have played. Anyway, it is ancient history, as you say, but it was nice for these women yesterday. Tancredi, probably of the three, the one that had the biggest impact on the pitch, particularly at the Olympics, as we said when this was announced. And the thing is, and what's great about this in many ways, is that they'll be missed in terms of like just if you're a fan of them and you got to use them, but they won't be really missed in terms of their talent right now, because this is a program that is producing young players that are taking over. Janine Becky with a couple goals in this one. It wasn't the best performance on the field, but I think it was a bit of a disjointed effort anyway because of the nature of the game. But they got the win, and that's the important thing. And there's bright days ahead for this program because it's very young, and that's what I'm getting at. Is that it used to be in the past that a player like Melissa Tancredi retired, we would have been going, oh my God, how are we going to replace her impact off the bench? How are we going to do this? Whereas not anymore. We don't think about that. We just sort of celebrate the career and move on, and can move on with confidence.
Yep, that's exactly. Just before the break, Duane, we'll touch Clint Dempsey made his return to active competition between whistles this weekend by starting for the U.S. men's national for Seattle. Sorry, and you know what? It was great to see Clint back, first time in 6 months, and after heart problem, he had a heart irregular beat problem that was taken care of. It took some time, but he's back. How important do you think it is to see Dempsey back, not just for Seattle, but for the game in our side of the country?
Yeah, I think it matters more for the U.S. national team because we saw a pretty tepid performance with the 1-0 win over Jamaica, only the one goal in the 2 games there. I mean, they're trying to spin it positively and say that they had 2 clean sheets, against basically a C team and a team that didn't make the Hex. But nonetheless, I think that if he can get back and get back into get close to his old form, that might help sort of, like I said, impotent kind of performance offensively the U.S. men's national team is going through right now. But certainly from Seattle, they want to have Dempsey back in the fold. It'll be interesting to see how they integrate him because, of course, they went on their hot streak basically when he went out of the lineup last year, and it propelled them obviously to the MLS Cup final and the MLS Cup championship, I should say. So you wish him well health-wise, and glad he's back. But I think that the impact's going to be, because Seattle proves that they can win without him. I think the impact's going to be more felt on the national team side. Will be very interesting to see whether Dempsey can get back into that fold and maybe get back into a Gold Cup lineup this summer. I don't know what the U.S. is going to do with their Gold Cup lineup. We'll have to wait and see for that.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll take a little sip of hot toddy, both Duane and I, and we'll come back with some more soccer talk.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And we are back. Duane, very rarely do I wake up that godly early on a Saturday morning. But this Saturday, for people like me, it was kind of worth it.
Well, if you're a Chelsea fan, yeah. If you're an Arsenal fan, it might not have been worth it.
You might have wanted to miss that game if you're an Arsenal fan. You might have wanted to just stay in bed.
Yeah, well, yeah. Most of us probably watched it in bed if they have a TV around or a computer around to do that. No, look. What's the storyline from this? We've been talking for, I think, probably 2 months now how we feel that the title race is over, and certainly that did nothing to dissuade us from that feeling in this game. Complete performance by Chelsea again, but the other side of the coin is what's more interesting in this is that Arsenal once again appears to be kind of just wasting a season, and I called it on Twitter after one of the biggest wastes of resources in the modern history of sport, any sport anywhere. Arsenal is so rich and with so many fans, such a large fan base in that huge stadium. They charge more money for tickets than any other team in football in the world, basically. But yet they just putter around in 4th place or so. And there's nothing wrong with 4th place. If you're, a club that doesn't have that resources, that could be an amazing accomplishment to do it consistently, to make the knockout round of the Champions League year after year after year. That is an accomplishment. But, here, you get your bingo card out here. This is what it reminds me of. It reminds me of the bad old days of the Toronto Maple Leafs in the sense that they had all this money, but yet all they seem to want to do is make the playoffs, just make the playoffs, not like excel in them. And that's kind of how I get the feeling about Arsenal. They just kind of want to finish top 4 so they get those Champions League dates and they can make money. That's the vibe I get from that. And Wenger, apparently they're rumoring that he's going to get another extension, even though the fan base is screaming for his head. That just tells me it all, is that they're satisfied. Ownership, the board, people around that club are satisfied with the performance because it is profitable to them. And that's kind of always the vibe I get with Arsenal, is that they're more interested in profitability, getting top 4, consistently qualifying for the Champions League, which is the equivalent of the playoffs, year after year after year, so they can be more profitable. And I just don't. If I were an Arsenal fan, I'd be incredibly frustrated with that, because if they ever just unleash the full power of their resources on that league, I think that they could be legitimately a power, winning that league year after year. It's always been, as someone who supports a team outside of that, I fear that if they ever unleashed it, but they don't seem willing to.
I think it's the case in the Premier League, and let's put it in different terms. To win the league, you kind of have to be ready not to be in the top 4. What I mean is, you have to sometimes take risk. You have to sometimes gamble. Maybe you start your starting 11 2-3 games in a row more than you should, and not rest the players that you should, because you want to go for it, because you're ready to risk, willing to go for it, to make it happen, willing to go for it. And I don't see that in Arsenal. Haven't seen that in a long time. Is it a Wenger too conservative maybe situation? That could be the case, but it might be a cliche. But like a Chelsea, why is Chelsea first with 9 points clear of Tottenham, 10 off Arsenal, Man City, and 12 off Arsenal? Because they were willing and ready to risk things this year. They changed their formation, their mentality. They asked player with a very different skill set to have different responsibilities. Look at Victor Moses and other successful stories like Alonso with Chelsea right now. And that is happening because Conte was willing to risk it. And is Wenger willing to risk it? I don't think he is.
Well, I mean, he is a guy that's stuck in his ways in many ways. It's funny because, I'm old enough to remember when Arsenal was the talk of the league. We're talking 12 years ago, 12, 14 years ago now.
That 2014.
They were,
yeah,
I
that
think it's
2000,
14 years.
sorry to interrupt. 2014 that won the Premier League unbeaten with the likes of Evra and all those.
Yeah, they were at that point. But what's happened is that that's around the time that if you look at the history of when Arsenal started to not be the top is when Chelsea got the money. And then a few years later, City gets the money. And that drastically changes the top of that table, right? You go from kind of a traditional sort of stale, to be honest, at the time, if you remember, top of the league. And then you have all this money that gets interjected and it sort of changed the game and Arsenal didn't adjust. So Wenger still remains, steadfast in his belief that he should look for value in signings and he should, and he famously doesn't splash it out. He tries to find young players, develop them, and then sell them on for profit down the line. And that's incredibly frustrating when you have that much money to play with. And I'm not saying that they should, do a City 2008 and completely blow the bank. They don't need to. Like City in 2008 had to spend to the level they did to catch up because they were so far behind and they didn't have any tradition, any history, any winning history. I hate when people call you to make history synonymous with winning, but anyway, they didn't have the winning history to fall back on.
You can have a history, poor it could be, but you still have one. Doesn't matter if it's a winning one or not. It still counts as history.
Yeah, that is the most ridiculous thing when people say you have no history. Well, no, they're 120 years old, and that goes for a lot of clubs. And
okay,
history.
It's a bad
one.
It
wasn't always successful.
It's a lost history, but it's still one.
Yes, exactly. The definition of the word. But at any rate, the point I'm being is Arsenal doesn't need to make that kind of expenditure. It just needs to make a little bit more. It needs to be a little bit more aggressive in the transfer market. It needs to be a little bit more forward thinking in terms of trying to catch up with some of these teams that really are outspending them now.
Okay, here's a question. It's 2017. The world of tactics, analytics, athletics, how to take care of your body, nutrition as an athlete has changed drastically over the last 10 years. Is Wenger out of touch?
Well, maybe. I mean, we don't know exactly what happens behind closed doors. You never do. But certainly he does seem like a manager that maybe, he's not a young man anymore either, right? And so seems like a manager that might be too comfortable in where he is. That's what I'll say about him. I don't think he's out of touch so much. Is that anyone who's been there that long, I mean, this obviously now that Alex Ferguson is long gone is the elder statesman of managers. And when he does leave Arsenal, I think that will truly be the end of an era when you see guys stay for decades. But yeah, he needs something fresher. I think that if he changed his position, he changed where he was. And I honestly think sometimes he'd be happier at a club that had to spend the way it had to build the way that he chooses to build Arsenal. That if he was at a mid-level club or a club like, I don't know, Atletico Madrid or something. I just did pull one out of my hat. Not that Simeone's going to, but a club where you had to be, you had to be creative about how you build a team to be competitive. I almost get the hunch sometimes that he would be happier there. I've joked before that he would be the only manager in the Premier League that I'd be comfortable bringing to Major League Soccer would be Wenger, because he would need to sort of play that kind of value game the same way he does now, that he might take to that. Whereas if you bring Mourinho to the MLS, he'd last 2.5 weeks before he'd storm out in frustration. What do you mean I can't just buy that right back?
Well, we all know that when Mourinho
the referee, could you imagine?
No, Mourinho's going to come and he's going to bring Zlatan like he did twice in his career before. And look, it's going to go really well. By the way, let's just mention Zlatan for a second. With his 15th goal of this Premier League season during the weekend, Zlatan Ibrahimovic has become the oldest player ever in Premier League history to score 15 goals and more.
he's a talented player. My only issue with him signing United back in the summer was that it is so short-sighted. It's just so not the United way to go that way, although maybe it is now. It's certainly not the Alex Ferguson way. That was not an Alex Ferguson type signing, but nonetheless, um, it, United's in with a chance for top four. You got to give them that much credit, I guess. Although the game there and what I have in the lineup is what to talk about is, and I don't know how to evaluate this beyond the fact that
Leicester.
it is getting awful precarious for the champions right now. They're only 1 point off the drop.
It was talked about during the weekend at many different outlets about maybe the potential sacking of a Ranieri. I don't think it's the way to go. What brought Leicester here was stability with its core, was the belief, was the confidence that was built in the championship and in the early season in the Premier League over a few years ago. And that happened with consistency, with resourcefulness, do it a lot with not as much as other big clubs. I say big clubs because it became a big club over the last 2 years with the amount of influx of money it did receive from AirAsia and other sponsors it did have in ownership. But that for Leicester, now 1 point off the drop, like I mentioned, it is getting pretty precarious in 16th spot for Leicester, and they quite not seem to turn around. Is it really just because last year they had no implication in Europe whatsoever and they could totally focus on their one job, which was to shock the world, and this year they have to play on different front, and even on league side, cup side, and Champions League side they had to use resource and lost some resources during the AFCON. So what do you think is the problem with Leicester?
I think that they lost a couple players over the summer, not a lot, but enough that were damaged, that made a damage. They have multiple fronts. There was a lot of in any title run. So this isn't a dismissal of what they accomplished last year, but in any title run, there's luck involved, and the luck's not bouncing their way this year. You look at a guy like Vardy is just not getting the bounces that he got last year, and that's a very non-analytical way to look at things, but it certainly does play a role. It's dumb luck, and people hate to acknowledge that in sports, but it's true. Also, you look at the rest of the league. There's a lot of stuff going on last year with Chelsea blowing up. City blew up in its own kind of way. With Pellegrini being sort of unceremoniously dumped in the middle of the season and sending their season into a spiral. The injuries there. United having an historical bad year. Liverpool firing their manager halfway through. There was a lot of stuff going on around in the league last year that didn't necessarily, couldn't ever necessarily predict it would happen again. So I don't think anyone thought Leicester had a chance to repeat. The fact that they've dropped this far, I mean, that is a bit of a mystery, but maybe maybe they made a deal with the devil, now they're paying it back. They're going to go down. And I'm not even going to lie, I'm kind of cheering for it now because it's kind of funny.
Yeah, well, to be quite honest, there is a pretty bad team behind Leicester when you consider the Premier League level. You do have teams like Sunderland and Hull City that are struggling to get points, even though they're playing a little better than you can give them credit for, or maybe it's just perception. But Crystal Palace with Sam Allardyce never been relegated as Premier League manager, and this streak might end this season. And Swansea, yeah, they're a little bit better off than they were when Bob Bradley was the coach, but still they're in 17th, and they're tied on point to Leicester though. So that 1 point difference, it's 2 points by the way total. So 20 and 19th spot on the table, 19 points. Then you have Hull City at 20, Swansea and Leicester at 21. There's a little gap to Bournemouth, but Borough too at 16. So you have 6 teams literally battling for relegation.
Yeah, quickly on Swansea, of course, I watched that game this weekend, and that's one of those heartbreaking things that can kill a team in a relegation fight, because they had hung in there and defended, pretty well for considering how poor they are defensively generally for a lot of that game, to keep it at 1-0. They get the goal against the flow to get the draw. Seemed like they're in for a shock draw. The fans are piling out of the Etihad, and then Jesus saves the day, right? So that's kind of one of those heartbreaking things that Jesus saves
we call him the Savior. Isn't his nickname? The Savior.
Yeah,
he comes into Man City and he saves the team. He's the Savior. But Gabriel Jesus, again, great performance in his first 2 starts for Manchester City. 1 goal, 2 assists, and a great performance overall. Duane, is Gabriel Jesus the Savior for Manchester City?
Well, he certainly is giving a bright spot to an otherwise frustrating year. There's talk, I think it's more tabloid talk right now, but Aguero perhaps being on the outs. I think that's an exaggeration. You need a couple strikers there. The problem with Aguero is how difficult he has staying healthy. I don't think that Pep is ready to move away from one of their truly world-class players, just because they've got a young kid in there that's doing well off the hop. But as I said, they're just going to add some pressure to that, which can only benefit that team. And it has, there's no title race there. It seems like maybe they've got it going together enough to protect the top four now, although it's no sure thing yet. Still got an FA Cup run to go with a fairly accessible. Well, they've got a nice straw in the Champions League again with the FA Cup in the next round. So still something to play for in Manchester City. And I think that's kind of what they're focusing on now. And Jesus has been a breath of fresh air in an otherwise frustrating season.
Yep, exactly. And we will have fun all season long with our puns that we can do with this new player from Manchester City. We're going to wrap the show now to rest our voices for the bid week upcoming. But a few tidbits of information before we let you go. Ambroise Oyongo and Cameroon have defeated Egypt 2-1 with a great goal by Abgagabar, if I pronounce it correctly, which I am not. But great flick over the defender and finish to win the game for Cameroon, winning against Egypt in the final of the Africa Cup of Nations 2017.
Yeah, maybe the nicest championship clinching goal since Zidane in the Champions League back in the day. If you haven't seen that one, it's a sort of volley that he blasts into the top corner against Leverkusen to win the Champions League, which is probably his most famous goal of his career. Not his most famous moment, unfortunately, as we all know how his career ended, but nonetheless, Zidane, a brilliant player. We saw it that day. But I would say the nicest championship clinching goal since that day, which was over a decade ago now.
Yep, exactly. So great job to Ambroise Oyongo, the Montreal Impact, and the Cameroon for their win at the Africa Cup of Nations 2017. Stay tuned to Soccer Today all week long with live show. So far, the schedule is slated for 10 a.m. every day this week. We're going to talk about Academy news this week as well, because NYCFC Academy added 4 levels of competition that was needed, and that is actually a great mark of intent for the future for this club that are actually putting their footprints in a market that might be desperately needed of it. Minnesota United announced the launch of its MLS Development Academy as well. Those are topics that we will touch more this week. And until next time, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.